Okay, today we're going to put some race lifters, the short travel hydraulic roller race lifters in the 1980 Trans Am. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the distributor out. I'm going to do that fuel line. I'm going to do the wires to the alternator. And then I'm just going to take the solenoid apart from the top. That way all the wires come with it. That way I can just move the wires out of my way. And then I'm going to take the two bolts out over here to take just take the linkage out together. And take the nut off where the throttle cable hooks to the carburetor. But first, got to drain all the water out of it, because on a small block Chevy there's water passages on the front here that the water travels through. There's some on the back, but most of those on a small block Chevy are blocked off. But as you can see, we've got this one set to where it routes water up to the gooseneck here. See? So water travels through those too. It just helps keep the back cylinders cooler, especially like when you're running a power header. It helps keeps them back cylinders a little bit cooler. But yeah, gonna drain the water out of it. Distributor, linkage, nitrous, the wiring. Take the wiring off the back of the alternator, and then I'll be able to move all that out of the way. Undo that water hose, and then I should be able to take the 12 bolts out and lift it all up together and take it all out. And then we'll have to take the valve covers off, of course, and the rocker arms and the push rods. But that's where we're going to start. Alright, so I got the distributor out. I just undid the spark plug wires, undid the magnetic pickup, and then you just loosen that bolt, which is usually on this side, but I put it over there because there's too much going on over here to reach it. But you loosen that bolt, then you just slide that bracket back, that bracket there, you just slide it back, and it pulls right out. Now on an HEI, you just got a little power wire that clips to the side, and you just unplug it and remove your spark plugs. Now typically you'd want to take the cap off and see where your rotor's pointing and try to put everything back in the same spot. That way you don't have to go find the compression stroke and go through all that. But I'm going to be turning the motor over to set the rockers with the intake off. So I went ahead and pulled it out like that because I'm going to have to go through and find the number one compression system. I'm going to have to find number one on compression stroke anyway. Plus, you know, it'd be good for me to go over that with the video. But alright, so I got that out. Now I'm going to work on the carburetor linkage, taking that off. Alright, I got the linkage off for the carburetor. I just unscrewed the two bolts and it came out there for the throttle linkage. Took the valve covers off. I drained the water out of it. That should give me enough water out of it that the intake don't have any more water in it. I mean, we're going to change the oil regardless, but at least the amount of water we can get down in the motor, the better. Alright, so now I need to undo that water hose. Take the wires off the back of the alternator. Everything runs to the back of the alternator because the battery's in the trunk. Undo that fuel line. Then we can just unplug the wide open throttle switches. We'll have to unhook that from the alternator bracket. And that should be able to get the wires out of the way. And then, oh yeah, if you unscrew that nut on the top of those solenoids will come apart and the wires will come with them. That way we can just move everything out of the way with the wires and pull everything up together. But yeah, that's what I'm gonna do next. Buddy Austin came over to help me hang out. Alright, so I took all the wires off the alternator. We took the tops off the solenoids with just that one top nut, and they come apart. And I just moved everything back here on the sides. And now we're just breaking the intake bolts loose. I'm just breaking them, barely breaking them loose, this side and then that side, and then we're doing a crisscross pattern to loosen them up. Once we get those loose, the intake should pop right off. Got Austin helping me. Alright, we got all the intake bolts out, all the wires out of the way, so it should pop right up.
Ready to lift up on it?
Yeah, go ahead. Here. Lift up on the water neck and the back of the carburetor, it should pull right up. It's going to be a little tight because of that sealing on the front and the back.
A little tight.
Yeah, here. When they're a little tight like that, just take a screwdriver. Oh, nope, you got it now. But you can take a little screwdriver right in the front, kind of wedge it in there and kind of pry it on it.
Now.
Just lift it up on the front and it'll pop off the back. Just got to make sure you don't break that oil sending line. Plus it's probably caught on this a little bit.
There's a thing sharp. God, someone's got it.
Alright, let me put the camera down and help them get it off. Sometimes they're stuck a little. Alright, we got the intake off. It was just stuck on the sealant really good in the back. Chris had a leak back here before. I guess when he redone it, he put the whammy on it, which isn't a bad thing to do in the back because, or the front. So make sure it don't leak. You just don't want to put so much in it that when it dries, it flakes off and goes down in your motor. And check the cam gear. Yeah, cam gear looks good. So I was worried about the cam gear on the distributor, but after contacting MSD, that's a melanized gear, so those work with just about anything. So the next thing to do is we're going to take the rocker arms off. We're going to take the spark plugs out because I'm going to have to turn the motor over to set the rocker arms. And it's really hard to turn the motor over with the spark plugs in and the rocker arms off. Because, you know, every stroke's a compression stroke when you ain't got valves opening. So we're going to take the rocker arms off, take spark plugs out, and then we're going to start soaking the new lifters and mineral spirits. I forgot what I did with it. Yeah. We got the mineral spirits here in a jug.
My new tires in the back of the car.
Per the instructions, you got to soak the lifters and mineral spirits for 1 day and then soak them in oil for a day. And I've got some extra oil that we use for this car. We use the Mobil 1 synthetic. We use that in both cars. We use 5W30 sometimes and 10W30 sometimes, and I actually like the 1030 better, it seems. My car, it's got like a stock pump in it, so with the LT1s at idle, the oil pressure drops real low with them stock pumps, and it seems to not drop as low with the 10W30, even though you're supposed to put 5W30 in those. But anyway, we're going to take the rocker arms out and the spark plugs out, get the lifters soaking, and then go from there. Alright, we got the rocker arms out, the push rods and the lifters and the spark plugs. So now we gotta, I should have done this already, we gotta soak the lifters mineral spirits for 24 hours and soak it in oil for 24 hours. And then see, if you watch the video on my small block Chevy, you'll see the intake has dowel pins right here and right here that the intake rests on, but you don't have that with a small block Chevy, and you got to make that intake gasket stay up there. So what people do is they put a dab of silicone right there, put the intake on there, let it dry a little bit so it holds it. Then they put their bead across. But I got to clean all that up. But for now, it's going to be setting for a day or two. Put some paper towels or something in your intake port. You definitely don't want anything getting down in there. And we're going to cover it up with a blanket real good. And get these lifters soaking. And once the lifters get done soaking in mineral spirits and oil, then we'll go from there. Alright, so here's the race lifters. Comp cams, I forgot the part number. I think it's on here somewhere. There it is. 15853 is the part number, and then the dash 16 is just how many there are in the box. But now these come with what looks like a lubricant on them, but that's not a lubricant. So it's just to keep everything from rusting and everything like that, and you got to get that off of there. So what they recommend is to soak it in mineral spirits for 24 hours. And that's what we're going to do. Hi, buddy. You going to help me work on the car? Got some people coming over. We're going to cook some hamburgers and hot dogs. And now we're soaking the lifters in some oil. I took those lifters out and compared them to these stock lifters. Stock lifters. The ones we got off of eBay. And man, I know it's hard to eyeball that stuff, but they look like they're the exact same size. So hopefully we won't have to buy push rods, but we are going to definitely check that when we put everything back together. But yeah, let those soak for 24 hours, then I'll come out here and I'll clean the cylinder heads off where the intake goes, and the front and the back of the block where the intake goes. And then I'll clean the intake up. I already checked the sides where the gasket went. The gasket came off real good, so there's nothing where the gasket goes, but there is some RTV back on the back and the front that have to be scraped off. So I'll get those scraped off and start throwing it back together. Alright, now it's time to clean our surfaces up. You want to make sure you got everything, your wires, hoses, everything out of the way. Put you something down in there. I had no pillowcase I was using as a rag. Stick it down in there real good, because you definitely don't want any of that to fall down in your oil pan. And be real careful scraping on the heads, especially if you've got aluminum heads. On iron heads you really don't have to worry about it so much, but on aluminum heads you definitely want to make sure, if you're using a razor blade like I'm going to be doing, that you don't nick the aluminum when you're scraping it. But I'm going to scrape all that off there. Now I'm going to flip the intake over and scrape that one off. And the fuel bowls are still full, so gas is going to get everywhere. But yeah, that's the next step. Alright, once I get it all scraped off, then I hit it with some brake clean. Make sure it's good clean and it doesn't have any of that slimy residue left on it. Now we'll when we pull that rag out of there, we will make sure we pull it all up to where nothing falls in the motor, and check around, make sure nothing got past our rag. Alright, there we go. I got the intake all cleaned up. Just use the scraper, be real careful, and some brake clean. Now if you gouge it in this area or something like that, that's not going to make a big difference, but if you gouge it in this area, you're in trouble. So make sure to keep a sharp blade on it, and make sure you keep it nice and flat and go slow. But there really wasn't that much on this. Most of it was around here antifreeze and aluminum, they don't get along very well. And then brake clean got most of this. I just barely even ran the scraper on there. Another thing you can do is go backwards with the scraper if you're worried about gouging anything, because if you go backwards with it, you don't have to worry about that. But got it all clean, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop the number 1 lifters in. I'm going to pull this rag out. I'm going to drop the number 1 lifters in, and we're going to go ahead and check the push rod length. Now when you put the lifters in, you want to make sure there shouldn't be, see, these don't have any movement at all. You want to make sure they fit in the hole well and they slide up and down well. And I'm also going to turn the motor over and make sure that everything clears just fine with the link bar. Make sure it don't go down too far. It looks like the exhaust port's coming up, so I don't think the intake port started to come up yet. It probably has. Maybe it has. I don't know. I'm going to turn the motor over and see where it's at. Put both of them on the base circle. Put the push rods in. And then put the rockers on. And then I'm going to mark the valve stem seal. Or the valve stem. The end of the valve stem. Right here. The marker. Now I'm going to turn them over 2 or 3. Well, I'm going to set the rocker arms with the lifters on the base load. And I'm going to put these at 0. So I'm going to set those at 0. These are short travel lifters. We're going to put them dead on 0. And then turn it over a few times and see what kind of mark we got on that. But I left my tools in my car because I was working on the girlfriend's aunt's car. So I'm going to have to go out there and grab those real quick. I'm just going to turn it over with the crank bolt, all the spark plugs out of it, so it should turn over pretty easy. But we're going to check that next. Alright, so I turned the motor over till the exhaust, that side, went all the way up. And it started to come down, the intake open, went all the way up and came back down. And then turned it over just a little bit more, make sure that the intake was all the way down. That puts them both on the base load. And I put my push rods in, making sure that they went down in the hole. Can't hardly see that. And made sure that now I put the rockers on, making absolutely sure that I put the flat side of the rocker piece down inside there, flat side up, so that the way the poly lock goes on. I back my set screw Allen nut, back my set Allen nut all the way back out, and then I tighten down the nuts and the rocker arm poly lock nuts there until I had no more up and down movement on the push rod. And I made absolutely sure I was looking down in there to make sure that it didn't push the plunger off of the retainer when I was screwing them in. And then I just tightened up the Allen nut real good for now. And I marked the end of the push rod stems with black marker. You can see it a little bit there. And now I'm going to turn the motor over about three times that the rocker arms go up and down, and see what kind of mark it leaves. But small block Chevys, the exhaust is on this side, then the intake, and then this cylinder, it's intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. But you'll know by this, that's the exhaust, and then the intake port, that's the intake. So, and you want the exhaust to come all the way up, come down, and then the intake will come up and let it go all the way down, then just turn the motor over just a little bit more, and that'll put them both on the base circle. Now what a lot of people do is they'll do exhaust starts to come up, then do the intake, and then the intake starts to close, do the exhaust. But I wait for the intake to close, turn it over a little bit more, and then set it. That way I can just start turning the motor over a quarter of a turn at a time and just go through the firing order. So I can set, these cylinders are driver's side, front to back, 1, 3, 5, 7. That side, 2, 4, 6, 8. And the firing order is 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2 on a small block Chevy or LT1. And you got a quarter turn of the crank. Well, there's, you know, 2 full revolutions of the crank complete the intake, compression, power, exhaust for the 4-stroke engine. So a quarter of a turn will get you from top dead center on each firing order. So if you're on 1, top dead center, which is where we're at right now pretty much, then you can turn it a quarter of a turn and be on 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. But yeah, that's how I like to set them. But let's go ahead and turn the crank over. Let the intake and exhaust come up and down at least 3 times, and take those back off and see what we got. Not sure how good you can see that. But that's dead center. That's perfect. That'll work. Yeah, that'll work perfect. Now, if you're too far down here, that means it's too long. If you're too far up here, that means you're too short. And actually, though, yeah, that's good. This one didn't mark that well for some reason, but this one marked really good. And on the small block Chevy, it's all going to be the same size push rod, because the exhaust and the intake, it's all the same size. But yeah, that's perfect. If anything, it might be just a touch too long, but I don't think we're going to do no better than that with the lengths that you can buy. So yeah, that'll work. All right, I want to also reiterate on these push rods. When you're setting your rocker arms, don't use that spin method, because I'm telling you, even with these set correctly, the push rods will still spin. You're looking for up and down, and if your poly locks screw in good, you can tell when it hits the plunger with the poly locks, if they screw in nice and good like these do, and the ones on my LT1 do. But make sure when you're screwing them in that you're not pushing down on the plunger. It's hard to see. Make sure that the plunger don't come off that retainer. Make sure you're at 0 before you start doing your preload. We didn't do preload on these. And look, no up and down, and look, that one spins easy. No up and down, and that one spins easy. But you want exactly no up and down before you start your preload. Don't do the spin method. I've got all the lifters in. Now we're going to put all the push rods in. I'm going to put all the rocker arms, just set them on. I'm going to turn the motor a quarter turn. I'm going to do 8. Turn it a quarter turn, 4. 6, 5, 7, 2, quarter turn, and just follow the firing order. I'm going to set them all, and then we're going to prep the intake gasket and drop the intake back on after we get all the rockers set. All right, we got all the rocker arms on and they're all set. So now we're going to do the intake gasket. And what I'm going to do, like I said before, On the LT1, it's got dowel pins right here to help hold this up. With the small block Chevy, it don't have those. So what I do is I put a little bit of RTV just through here, just a little bit smeared on there, and then I stick the intake gasket on there, and I could put a bolt in the back and the front to make sure it's all lined up, and then I let that set up a little bit, and then we drop the intake on. Now the intake does come with these. Those are for your China wall in the front and the back. Throw those in the garbage. Just use a bead of RTV, and it comes with a distributor gasket as well. And we'll probably swap that one out. Even though the one on the distributor is brand new. But I'm going to go ahead and get that set up. So you got some pretty big sized bolt holes. So you want to make sure that your intake ports are lined up and that your bolt holes are lined up. And I put that RTV through here and through there. So you just let it set up, it'll become tacky, and then we do the RTVs for our China wall. Across there, we'll just lay one straight bead across through there. And then we can take these 4 bolts I've put here to help hold the gasket a little. And then we can drop the intake on. I'll probably go ahead and take those out. It's pretty tacky already. Alright. Now, take them other 2 bolts out and we'll drop the intake on. Or lay the bead for our China wall. Then drop the intake on. Here I'm just taking the camera on my phone and sticking it back there and making sure that my bead that I laid across the China wall is all squeezing out and looking good across the back there. Here I'm just doing the same thing across the front. Now I got the intake laying on there, and I just snugged up the 4 corner bolts, because what I want to do is I don't want to smush that RTV out there while it's still wet, so I want it to set up a little bit, then squeeze it down so it's nice and like more of a rubbery than a liquid. So that's what we're doing now, and looks good so far. I got the intake bolted down, and I did a sequence. I did this one, and then I did the other side on this side, and then the other side on that side, and then this one, and then went over there, over here, over there, over there, over there, over there, over there, and I just did a crisscross pattern, and I did 2 waves of it. I snugged them all up, and then the second wave I tightened them the rest of the way down. Now make sure the distributor is going to go in last, so make sure you put a rag or something over that, because you definitely don't want to drop anything down in there. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to find top dead center on the number 1 cylinder over here, driver's side front. Now there's a few different ways you can do this. You can put your finger over the hole and have someone bump the starter until it blows your finger off. Then you're on your compression stroke, and that should be where you drop your distributor at. You drop your distributor in, you want it to point at number 1. You want the rotor to point right at number 1. And theoretically, you can make the rotor point any which way you want. Just make sure that the number 1 spark plug is going to the terminal on the cap that the rotor's pointing at, and then you go in the firing order 184365572. But now if you've got an HEI and you buy the stock plug wires, if you have it any other way than it pointing at number 1, your spark plug wires probably are not going to reach. Okay, so they make those a specific length based on you having the number 1 spark plug wire on the cap and in the spot where it's pointing at number 1 cylinder. So that's the way we're going to set it up. We're going to get it on the compression stroke and top dead center, and then drop it in with the rotor pointing at number 1, and then we'll put the number 1 spark plug on the cap where the rotor is pointing at, and then we'll go from there. 184365572. Now also another way you can do it is with the timing mark on the balancer. Not sure if you can see that, but there's 2 full rotations of the crank to complete the 4 strokes: intake, compression, power, exhaust. Now if you put this on 0 on the balancer, which the timing mark for the balancer must be on the other side, so because I don't see it, but if you put this on 0, now you could be on compression stroke for number 1, or it could be 180 out, and you could be on the compression stroke for, I believe, is number 6. So following the series 4 to 4 strokes, intake, compression, power, exhaust, we'll do just like we did for our rockers when we set our rockers. So we'll let the exhaust come all the way up. It'll go down, let it go down, then the intake will start coming up, and then we'll let the intake go down. That means that the next stroke is going to be both valves closed, which is going to be our compression stroke. Then we put it on 0 after the intake closes, and then we turn it just enough to come back to 0 down here, and that's going to put us on top dead center on number 1. Now they do make a tool that you can use to put in the spark plug hole to make sure that you're at top dead center. I've never used one of them before, but yeah, I'm just going to make the exhaust open and intake, compression, power, exhaust. So the exhaust is going to open, close, the intake is going to open and close, and then I'm going to turn this around till it says 0. And then I'm going to drop the distributor in, and with the rotor pointing at the number 1 cylinder. Now sometimes when you drop that distributor in, it don't want to go all the way down because you got an oil pump shaft down there that turns your oil pump. So the cam comes up and it meshes with this gear, and that's what turns your rotor and makes your distributor work. And then this little piece down here goes down into the notch on the oil pump drive, and that's what turns your oil pump. So the odds of hitting that dead on are slim to none, but when you drop your distributor in and it don't go all the way down, just turn the motor over by hand or have someone bump the starter, and it'll eventually fall down. But now when it does fall down, the rotor is going to turn a little bit this way. So when you put it in and you want it pointing at number 1, you might want to have it back just a little bit if it don't go all the way down. So I believe there's 8 different ways this will go in. But there's only 2 different ways it'll go into the oil pump shaft. So let's go ahead and find top dead center like I'd mentioned by turning it over with the exhaust open, exhaust close, valve open, valve close, and then turning it around right back to 0, turning the motor clockwise, and then let's drop the distributor in. Alright, as I said, I turned the motor over, exhaust came up, closed, intake came up, closed, and then I turned it around I didn't put it on 0. I put it, that's actually about 28 right there. The black mark on the tab is the 0 on the tab. And then the little pink mark on the balancer, that's 34 degrees. That's where we're running on motor. And then the black mark is 24 degrees. That's where we're running on nitrous. But I just put it in that ballpark because that's where we want it at anyway. Now I dropped the rotor in. As you can see, it's pointing about right there. So it's pointing at about number 3, between the 3 and the 5. But as you'll notice, like I said, it didn't go all the way down. So we didn't hit the oil pump drive. So when it does go all the way down, it's going to turn clockwise a little bit more. So that should put us dead on. See, when you lift these up and down, see how it spins? So it's going to spin clockwise a little bit more. And by the time it drops down that little bit, it should be right on number 1. So we need to make note of that. Because that's where our number 1 plug wire needs to go when we put the cap on top of it. Okay? And again, it doesn't really matter where you put it, as long as the number 1 plug wire goes to where that rotor's facing on the cap. But now, if you've got an HEI cap or the stock HEI plug wires, if you don't do it this way, your plug wires are probably not going to reach, and or you're not going to have enough adjustment in the distributor when you try to turn it to time it. So, but I'm going to turn the motor over by hand. That's going to fall down. I know 2 full revolutions is what I need, so I'm going to do 2 full revolutions to get me back on the compression stroke, and then I'm going to see where it's pointing at. It should be pointing right at number 1. It's hard to tell. See where it's pointing at right now? About right there. We want it pointing about right there. So I'm going to turn the motor over, let that, hopefully that'll drop down by itself. Do 2 full revolutions to get me back where I was here. And then see where it's pointing at. And then we can put our cap on, put our plugs in, and start running the spark plug wires back to it. Also, not sure if I mentioned this or not, but that little gasket down there, make sure you put some oil or something on that, because we're going to be turning that and you don't want it dry. Because if it's dry, it might rip it. So I just oil those up a little bit so I can turn the distributor to set the timing. Alright, we turn the motor over, and then it dropped down in there, and we put the balancer back where it was, and look at there, pointing right directly at number 1. That's where we want it. So now when we put our cap on, we want to make sure that where we run number 1 to on the cap is directly right there where that rotor's pointing. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Put the cap on, hook the wires up. This one just uses the magnetic pickup to the ignition box. And then I'm going to start putting in plug wires, and again, the cylinders are 1, 3, 5, 7. Then on that side, 2, 4, 6, 8. This distributor spins clockwise. So 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2 is how you put the spark plug wires on it. And that's it. Once we get that on there, I'll put the valve covers on it and see if it'll start. Alright, before I put my plugs and wires in, I went ahead and put that clip piece in there. Just make sure the both side is up, and make sure both of your prongs sticking out there go over top of the distributor ledge right there. So when you tighten it, it actually holds something. But we got that on there. Probably need to straighten up a little bit, but it's on there. Now all to do plugs and wires. Alright, I got the plug wires in like I said. So the rotor was pointing right at that one. So we went 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. And back to 1. And again, 1, 3, 5, 7. Front to back, 2, 4, 6, 8. Alright, now let's hook up the battery and let's see if it starts. Alright, we got the battery hooked up. Let's see, no smoking from wires. It's the first attempt to start it. It is going to take a little while to start because the fuel bowls were drained. Alright, so it's a little out of time. So we're going to turn it back a little bit. Not sure which way it needs to go. I'm going to try it one way and then we'll try the other. Alright, so if you turn it this way, that adds timing into it. If you turn it the other way, clockwise, that takes timing out of it. But I think it needs to go back, put more timing in it. So we're going to turn it back a little. And I'm going to tighten that bolt up a little bit. We want this to turn, but we won't want it to turn that easy because it'll turn while we're trying to start the motor. Tip number 2. There you go. It wants to go a little bit more, but I don't want to run it too much because the valve covers are off. It's going to shoot oil everywhere. But let's turn it back a little bit more, see if we can't get it to at least idle. All right, here we go, tip number 3. See, that's much better. Yeah, it still wants to go back more. All right, attempt number 3, I think. I'm losing count. Alright, so it's wanting to idle there. Dog don't like the sound, but we're going to turn it back a little bit more, and then I'm going to get the valve covers on it, and then we'll get it up to temp and we'll set it with a timing light. That's pretty much it, man. I'm going to put these valve covers on. These Moroso ones. They're a little warped along the rails there, so I'm going to try to straighten them out with a board and a hammer on it. See if I can't get them straight. But yeah, see, we're already starting to shoot oil everywhere. So instead of shooting oil everywhere, we're going to get the valve covers on. We're going to fix those and get the valve covers on. And he had a makeshift plate here, AC plate, whatever you want to call it, HVAC plate, that he kind of cut out and put on there. It's kind of warped, and I put this coil on there, and it holds on with just those rubber bushings. And where it's warped, it keeps breaking them bushings. So I'm gonna put that one on it. It'll be nice and flat. And then I'm just gonna get some long bolts to go through here, and then find some rubber pieces that'll fit right there, and then bolt it to the new one. But yeah, I got oil everywhere. I'm gonna turn it back a little bit more, add a little more timing to it. Again, counterclockwise adds timing. If you're at 20 degrees and you want 30, turn it counterclockwise this way. If you've got too much timing in it, say you got 40 and you want 36, turn it clockwise. Takes timing out. Now, The distributor's locked in this one. So we can set the timing at idle or whatever, but on motor we run 34, and then we pull 10 degrees for nitrous for a 250 shot. And what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, if you're setting your timing on a stock HEI, I usually just rev it up to like 3,500. That way the vacuum advance and the mechanical advance all comes in, and then I usually just set them to 36, and wherever they fall at idle is where they fall at idle. But most stock cams, they'll idle, you know, like, I think it's 8 to 12 degrees. I could be wrong, but I know the bigger cams, they like to idle higher. So, and that's why we lock this one out, because if you put 20 degrees at idle and you bring it all in with the way the stock HEIs are set up, it's going to bring in way too much timing when you rev it up. So you gotta limit, and you can limit the HEIs on how much timing they add when the weights swing out, when the vacuum, there's no vacuum. But yeah, we cruise these cars and we like to drive them, and it does hurt gas mileage a little bit when you lock them out like that, but whatever, that's what we do because it's easier. You set your timing at idle, revved up, or whatever, however you want to do it. It just makes it easier. And this car, I've had it at 38 degrees before, and it don't kick back when you try to start it. So it's got 11-to-1 compression and a comp 294 HR cam or 292 retrofit roller. But yeah, I'm gonna get the valve covers on it, and then I'm gonna change the oil and do that plate delete, and then start it up, get it up to temperature, and set the timing at 34 degrees locked out for motor. And that pretty much do it.
So I did wound up having to take the plug wires off, take the cap off, and then pull the distributor up just a little, just to disengage the gear, the cam gear and the distributor gear. And I did turn it back 1 tooth, just because I had to turn it so much counterclockwise to get it where I wanted to. The plug wires just couldn't, I mean, they could still reach, but they started getting tight on me. So, and I needed more timing. So if you run into that situation where you're out of adjustment on your distributor for whatever reason, spark plugs ain't long enough, you have an HEI and the vacuum canister's hitting, or something to that effect, if you need more timing, take the plugs off, plug wires off, take the cap off, and undo the tab that holds the distributor and pull it up just enough to disengage the gear. And if you need more timing, turn the rotor counterclockwise and then put it back in. Just try to go 1 tooth. You can feel it. You pull it up, it disengages, turn it a little bit and push it down, and it should engage that next tooth. I think there's eight different ways you can put this in. The rotor will mess with the gears. The distributor gear messes with the cam gears. But anyway, if you have too much timing, you don't have enough adjustability, then you want to pull it up and turn it 1 tooth clockwise and set it back down in there. And then put your cap and your wires back on again the way you had them. But just keep fooling with it until you get it where you want it, and so you can get the timing that you need with the adjustment just by turning the distributor.